I'm currently Director of Scholastic Training over at Athletic Lab under Mike. I've been working with Mike since about 2008. And about 3 years ago, he brought me over here to kind of take over the Scholastic program and work with the various youth athletes and teams. I graduated from Cal State Fullerton. I was under Dr. Lee Brown there for a couple of years, and have pretty much focused all my education and experience on jumps and the development of jumps, specifically related to track and field athletes. I'd say track is my main area. I've also worked with volleyball, basketball players as well. So plyometrics is obviously quite an important topic for me in my career, so I'm excited to talk about this today. So the three main areas I'm going to go over are plyometric prerequisites, kind of as I see it, and then I'm going to go over my plyometric progressions and then some coaching recommendations as well. I'm going to try my best to keep it under 10 or 15 minutes. So first, plyometric prerequisites. I break this down into three areas: postural correctness, technical correctness, and then kind of understanding what strength requirements are related to plyometric training and performance. So first, postural correctness. I think this is the most important prerequisite when designing any training program for any athlete of any level. And we do we spend a lot of time kind of developing an understanding of what correct posture is with our athletes and how you use correct posture throughout various movements. And we start out with basic exercises like squats and single leg support exercises, single leg RDLs, hip hinge exercises, core stability, and various things. And this is something that we implement every day in some regard, whether it's a warm-up, cool-down, general strength circuits. I think this is absolutely the foundation for preventing injury, especially before a plyometric program, but also for sprints, weightlifting, any type of activity really. I think this is largely a kind of ignored area in strength conditioning because performance is often what everybody's after. So when it comes to plyometrics, people want people to jump far, jump high, and a lot of posture is kind of ignored. But yeah, it's quite a basic thing to implement. So this will be number one, and this basically, as strength coaches here, we have to deal with two main areas that affect an athlete's posture: lifestyle and sport. So we're only with our athletes for a couple of hours every day, and the rest of the time can have a large effect on how they move and how they are. Whether it's being at a desk all day, head down on their phone, how they sleep. That combined with what sport they play kind of plays a pretty large role. I work a lot with hockey players, field hockey, for example, and it's a very one-sided sport. It's very difficult to get a hockey player that's played for their whole life to just stand correctly, let alone jump and run without leaning over to one side or having one arm across their body, especially when you're talking sprint mechanics. So early specialization, which is very common now, obviously has a lot of issues, and in terms of posture, it can create a lot of problems that we as strength coaches have to try to undo, so to speak. And the most important ways to do it is first awareness. So the athlete has to understand what it means to have correct posture, and a lot of athletes don't, and certainly a lot of athletes are not aware of it, whether it's a youth athlete or a professional. I find issues transfer, they're very similar for both levels of athlete. Often it's more difficult to change an elite athlete's posture just because of how long they've been doing a particular sport or how long they've had these type of programs and bad habits. At least with youth, sometimes it's largely just neuromuscular. They're just not aware of it. And as soon as you do show them and they get some kind of feeling for correct posture, generally I've seen it's quite quick to be able to move forward as we want. The best way to do it is obviously having a holistic training program. So corrective exercises certainly do play a role, but it's not something that we use in isolation at all. Again, it's just something that's part of our warm-ups, cool-downs. We'll do specific exercises in between sets that kind of teach how to contract certain muscles to stabilize your spine and hips and things like that. But overall, it's a very well-rounded training program that goes a long way to fixing this issue. And it's something that is priority from day one, ongoing throughout any program, no matter what level they're at. So that's the first prerequisite. Technical correctness would be the second prereq, and it certainly flows naturally from correct posture. So now, having taught what correct posture is and what it might feel like for a particular athlete, now we have to implement that into something more dynamic, more movement-based. So in terms of plyometrics, we're talking about understanding how to take off and understanding how to land. And I sum these up in 3 areas. Of course, posture being number 1, understanding how to brace and maintain solid posture throughout impact of the various exercises, especially when we get to single leg work, where hip stability becomes a big issue. And 3 things related to that. Foot strike is obviously a really important topic for plyometrics, and basically what we want to see here is for vertical emphasis, so for vertical style jumps, we want to use the whole foot. Okay, so it's very difficult to have a heel-toe roll that I'm going to talk about in a minute for vertical. So most of the exercises are done flat foot contact. We want to kind of disperse the forces through the largest surface that we can. And then horizontal plyometrics, especially single leg, but double leg as well, we want to have a heel-toe roll. Okay, so a very common plyometric exercise that we do would be just a forward hop like this. And it wants to be a very kind of rhythmic heel-toe roll throughout the movement. Foot contact is obviously a really big issue, and it can go a long way to kind of causing or preventing injuries. There shouldn't be any type of kind of jolting thud through the body when you do plyometrics. And if you look at a lot of younger athletes or athletes that are not very confident in a certain plyometric progression, you'll see that. You'll kind of see them jump and really stomp the ground, and you'll see just a lot of kind of sequencing that's incorrect. And a lot of it is because of the way they strike the ground with their feet. So that's a major emphasis that we kind of talk about from day one, and you'll see when I get into my progressions, a lot of what we do early is just having them be in the right position and understanding how to flex their ankles and make sure that they are striking the foot correctly. So synchronization, third here. Basically, this is understanding how the whole body works as a unit during all types of jump progressions. The most basic is just the vertical jump. We work at the lab. We work a ton with volleyball players. Jumping is one of the most important things they do, but I can't tell you how many have poor sequencing of arms and legs when they jump. Arms go down first, then butt goes down, then they go. And when we test, it makes a huge difference. Not so much talking about performance tonight, but it does make a huge difference in how high they can jump just by synchronizing their limbs and their arms. So we do a lot of work on that. This becomes kind of really important when we talk about bounding exercises and single leg support plyometric work, how to use your arms in sync with your free leg and things like that. A little bit more advanced, but this is something that needs to have a basic understanding before you move forward with a certain progression. Stabilization is fourth here. Hip, knee, ankle stabilization, really key. Obviously, with a lot of double leg exercises, you see this all the time. It's really common. And a lot of it it's not a strength issue in my experience. It's just a neuromuscular issue. They're not aware of it. We put them in front of a mirror and they can do it right over and over again. So it's just something that they need to understand how to feel. And but in terms of knee stabilization, that's a major one. And then single leg work, hips drop. It's very common. Knees cave in, knees go out. They lose their foot position. So that's a major thing. Those 4 things done correctly will provide you with a certain rhythm and feel when you perform it. If you look at a lot of the best jumpers in the world, when they perform hopping and bounding and vertical jumps, they have just such a natural feel to it, such a natural rhythm when you watch them. That's kind of what we look for. That's the gold standard for athletes that perform well, with certain plyometric exercises. And the 4 things preceding to rhythm are the big factors there. So if all 5 of these things are correct, all 5 of these areas are done well, then the athlete's performing really well at that particular progression. Now, having said all that, that doesn't mean that their performance is at a high level, right? So there's a technical aspect to plyometrics, and then there's a performance side. And a lot of coaches, certainly sport coaches, not so much us, but sport coaches, they would take performance over anything, right? So it's all about how far you jump, how high you jump. And that causes a lot of issues with posture and technique. Performance is obviously more related to specific strength requirements that goes into kind of prerequisites of what we look for. So this is the third prereq. Who knows exactly what that means, strength requirements or adequate strength? The best way for me to determine if somebody has adequate strength for a certain progression is, are they able to maintain solid posture, and are they able to maintain good technique throughout the progressions? Not can they squat twice their body weight, or they've had 8 weeks of strength training programs, right? So for me, it's quite irrelevant. But when we are talking about performance, of course, there's going to be a correlation between, at the highest level, we know, certainly coming from a track and field background, there's a pretty high correlation between certain weight room exercises and abilities to perform, say, a depth jump, right? So if you want to drop from a 30-inch depth jump box and rebound 40 inches, the odds are you're going to need a pretty high level of weight room strength. It's not mandatory, though. I've seen athletes that have never lifted weights that can rebound very high, but the odds are it's going to help you, right? So kind of the three main areas of strength that you always want to look for, of course. Eccentric, concentric, so your ability to absorb force, and then the power and the force that you produce. Jumping upward, of course. Generally, when we're talking about boxes, which is one method of plyometric training, when we are talking about boxes, you want to, I've always kind of used the rule of, if you're going to use a box, you need to rebound at least to that level of the box, right? That's something I got from Boo and Dan. So that way you see this athlete's strong enough to use that box because they are rebounding at that height. Postural strength is obviously key for everything. Maintaining posture under stress and under impact. That's visible, and you can always regress to a different progression if these things don't, if you're not seeing these things. So general body weight training and compound exercises, of course, just part of the holistic program that is required if you want plyometrics to really increase performance to a high level. So now I'm going to kind of go into my progressions. So how I have 5 phases of progressions that I look at. First one here, multi-jumps, quite standard, right? So I like to start off very static, and again, this all goes in line with our prerequisites, right? So teaching posture first. Posture and technique always come first. Performance always comes last. So static multi-jumps, very low intensity, high volume. You can do a lot of reps, and it's just things like jumping and freeze, right? So static being everything with a freeze. They look in the mirror, they can see what they're doing. You take the mirror away, they can start to feel it. They give me a lot of feedback about their positions. This is the best way for them to start learning their bodies and learning, do I have the right posture? Can they feel the right posture? Because the most important thing is that we develop athletes that can self-correct, right? We can't see everything they do, and for me, that's the most important thing in terms of technique. They need to know what they're doing. So then we go in place multi-jump. So from a static position, obviously now we're going rhythmic and we're going more continuous, and this kind of progresses through to moving. So a great stabilization exercise that I do with every level of athlete is just a single leg hop and stick. Okay, and are they able to not fall in? Is their knee stable? The first time they do it, they're all over the place. They're touching the floor, they're down. It doesn't take long before they start to figure it out, and their strength hasn't increased during that time, right? Their program has just got a whole lot better. Moving multi-jumps then, so obviously continuous multi-jumps moving in different directions, whether it's forward, backwards, lateral. I do all types of directions, even with linear athletes. So this would be phase 1 for me. Phase 2 would be depth jumping. So this is traditionally an extremely high-intense exercise, right? And it can be if you have a high box, or if you're jumping from a 3-foot box on one leg into bounding and things like that. It can be very high intense. But the way I use it for the most part as phase 2 of a progression is we have a little bit of impact. They understand when to relax and fire. It's a really good way of teaching athletes how to brace. So how to absorb contact and force. And I find depth jumps is very controlled. It's far more controlled than the next progression, things like bounding and skipping. So we can take our time on boxes. We can start from a low box. We can drop and freeze the way that we did before on a multi-jump. They think about it a little bit more. And then we go from slow squat, fast squat to a stiff leg jump. So the speed of which all of these progress, the speed is increasing each time. So a depth jump, slow squat here, we just drop in, controlling the landing down, and then exploding up. Again, all of these progressions are largely for them to feel what it means to do something correctly, right? And once these are mastered, then regular depth jumping is a breeze for these guys, right? So a fast squat here, so drop into a low squat, and then of course a stiff leg is keeping very rigid and understanding how to jump from a very stiff leg. So these are the 4 depth jump progressions I use with all athletes, no matter what level. And you can do all of this same stuff with a single leg as well. Obviously that's a little more advanced, but depending on box height, anybody can do this stuff. And it really does go a long way in teaching them body control and awareness, which is key to all of this. Phase 3 for me is bounding, and for me, vertical jumping is a bound as well, so I kind of group that together. 2 foot, 1 foot, so 2 foot vertical jump. First, broad jumping, then combination. So combination is verticals to broads to lateral jumps, combination of different types of 2 foot jumps. And then when you add some kind of implement, hurdle, or object, that kind of takes it up a notch for a lot of people. Single leg here, vertical skipping is a skip with some kind of intensity. It is a very high intense exercise. You're coming down with a lot of impact on one leg. So this is quite an advanced phase. This is why I put this stuff after depth jumping. It's far less controlled, and it takes a lot of awareness to be able to do this. Horizontal skipping then, obviously that's a little bit less impact, but it's a lot more speed. Horizontal bounding and combination bounding. Many athletes never get to horizontal bounding, right? So unless you're from a track and field background, a lot of coaches are never going to teach you how to bound. A lot of strength and conditioning coaches don't teach athletes how to bound, but in my experience with all the athletes that I've worked with, those that can bound correctly, those that get to this level and they bound very safely, very rhythmic, they can cover a lot of distance. They're often the fastest athletes. Their speed improves dramatically, and overall they are very athletic. They've developed quite a lot to be able to get to this point. In my experience with elite jumpers that I've worked with, quite a few triple jumpers and long jumpers, high level, they're all the best bounders, of course, right? So there's high correlation for me with being able to bound correctly and having a high performance in a vast array of sports.
Hey Nick, real quick, how do you kind of, delineate between different types of bounding? So there's bounding, from what I've seen, where it's basically just a knee drive bound, where there's not really a focus on cycling legs through. But we had a jumps coach at Memphis who was very much like, no, that's not bounding. If it's just a drive leg, it has to almost cycle through every single time. Do you differentiate between those two?
Yeah, if I'm working with a track and field jumper, then they need to bound full cycle, full knee drive. Everything's related to their event, right? In the multi-jump progression, phase 1, there's a lot of hopping, right? It's a lot of single leg hopping. There's alternate hopping. I don't call that bounding because just the intensity is very low. If an athlete's a non-track athlete, then I don't worry so much about cycling. Although everybody can benefit from it, and if they do get it, if I can see that they have a natural rhythm to their bounds early, then I'll progress them to a pretty high level bound, with full technique. But it's a lot of athletes, like I said, they stick around skipping, right? If they can skip at a high level and they can really jump with a skip, along with a lot of 2 foot work, bounding is kind of the minimum that they do. They don't do a whole lot of it, but it is a great thing if you can get there. Phase 4 combination methods. I gotta wrap it up a little bit here. Here I love to add med balls with jumping. So I use phase 4. After there's a pretty solid foundation of multi jumps and kind of if the athlete has a really good awareness of their body, then they can start to throw implements. So I think if an athlete is certainly their goal is to be as explosive as possible and sprint fast and jump far, they have to understand how to throw objects. They have to understand how objects move and how they can throw them and how they can produce force through a long range. And I think the combination is just a really great way to to develop that. So we broad jump with between the leg vertical. We vertical jump with over the head back. We combine a vertical jump and then land and then throw. There's quite a few different methods to this. Single leg jump and throw is obviously quite advanced, right? It's very difficult. But I've had some athletes that are really good. You know, they're very stable here at the hip, knees up. They're holding a ball. They're hopping, and then they're launching out into a big throw. And they can do it and never lose balance, right? So this is just something that we ideally would get to at this level. Phase 4 is very high level. This is super advanced stuff. This is loaded and resisted methods, right? So uphill bounding, downhill bounding even, weight vest, hopping, weight vest. You know, you can increase the intensity of any plyometric exercise just by adding a load, adding a hill. And again, this is something that I've got with if you're trying to get 2% out of a jumper, you know, if they're trying to jump 47 feet and they jump 46, female triple jumpers, maybe you start to add this stuff in, right? So, but I'm a big believer in leaving a whole lot out there. So if an athlete is still progressing from phase 1 and 2, then you don't need to add something else advanced until, you know, use a plateau for what it is. Plateaus are great. A lot of coaches shy away from them, but as soon as you get one, that's perfect, because then you know, let's go to another progression, right? So I'd love to kind of talk about this more, but I've definitely gone over my time. 5 recommendations that I just use. Just be very patient with these. You don't need to rush through all of these. Like I said, leave a lot in the bank, especially with younger athletes, and especially if you have an athlete for 4 years. You know, keep them progressing with low-level stuff before you get really advanced. Less is always more in terms of volume, especially when you get to the higher intense stuff. Increase intensity very slowly. Always focus on movement and awareness per athlete. That's the most important thing in preventing injuries long term. Use a very wide variety of exercises within a progression, right? So there's endless amounts of multi-jump ideas that you can create, and just, you know, you can really be creative with a lot of the stuff. And technique is always focus over performance, right? So these are just my 5 little recommendations here, and pretty much I'm done. So an extra resource, this is a book that I published in 2012, and a lot of this information is in there. This is a book that I wrote, developing long and triple jumpers, but it's not just completely long and triple jump. I probably should have called it vertical jumps. I would have sold more. But it can be very beneficial to a lot of non-jumpers, right? So it talks about speed and strength and plyometrics and everything. All right, so much appreciated. Thank you, guys.